Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, again, we're thankful for all you've done for us. Thankful for your word. Thankful, Lord, that we have the opportunity to open that word and see what you have for us. I pray tonight you'll anoint your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things that you'd have said. Anoint our hearts to receive. And I thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. All right, we're going to continue tonight with our good friend Micah. And you'll remember Micah last week. He was the guy that decided he wanted to have his own chapel, and so he hired a priest, and he made his images, and he did all of this. Well, let's see where that got him. So we're going to continue the story tonight in Judges chapter 18, beginning with verse 1. In those days there was no king in Israel. And in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. So the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from their territory, men of valor from Zorah and to spy out the land and search it. They said to them, "Go search the land." So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. While they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They turned aside and said to him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What do you have here?" He said to them, "Thus and so Micah did for me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest." He said to him, "Please inquire of God that we may know whether the journey on which we go will be prosperous." Okay, so we start off by seeing that in those days there was no king in Israel. In other words, there wasn't any authority over the tribes of Israel. The only authority were the tribal leaders. And so what was happening, of course, was, well, it wasn't bad, but everything was handled by the tribal leaders. So if the tribal leaders decided he wanted to do something, or they wanted to do something, there was no overarching authority to stop them from doing that. And we kind of saw that with Gideon. You remember when he called all the tribes together and they went after the, and here was Ephraim, they were really upset because nobody called them, and that kind of an attitude was amongst the tribes. You had your definite pecking order. And so you had to acknowledge that pecking order because there wasn't any overarching authority. Now Dan, you remember that Joshua, he divided up the land between all the tribes. And he gave them all their land and the boundaries, and this was their land. Well, because of the strength of the Philistines, you remember we talked about Gideon, and it said specifically that Dan had been driven from the valleys and was up in the mountains hiding. And so Dan had been driven from the land that was given to them, and they were hiding or in the caves and the rocks up in the mountains. Now if you look at your map, if I can get the map open myself, you'll notice down here, number 1 on your map, that's Zorah and Eshcol. Now Zorah, you'll remember, was where Samson was born. So Dan was down in this area. The piece of land that was given to Dan actually started up here a little higher and went all the way up to where you see the Hittites at the top. Dan was given kind of that coastal range right in there, was actually theirs. But because of the Philistines and the Amorites, they had driven them south up into the hills. And so they were really in these Judean hills is where they were hiding, more closer to Jerusalem, what is now Jerusalem. They should have been up in that upper part. So The children of Dan never got their inheritance. Now, one thing I find is interesting, notice it says here, they were seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in, for until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. What this tells me about Dan was, they expected somebody to give it to them. See, Joshua told them specifically, you go take the land. God is with you, go take the land. But Dan didn't do that. And in fact, if you remember, under Deborah, when she called all the tribes together, it was Dan who was hiding in the ships. You remember? They got in the ships and went out because, get away from the armies. They were hiding. And that was part of Dan, was on the seacoast, and they were seafaring people, some of them. So, right off the bat, this tells me that these guys weren't really interested in taking anything. They were just interested in somebody giving it to them. They wanted the easy way out. You never get the easy way out with God. It doesn't happen. We have to take what we want. Paul, he never said that you're supposed to just sit back in your easy chair and pray good and hard and God will give it to you. In fact, he said something about the fact that it's a tough battle, and it's only, the race is only won by the swiftest. And we take things by faith. We reach after things. We go after them. And that's what Dan failed to do. And so as soon as they backed off, well, the Amorites and the Philistines just came in and took them over. So now here they are, and they're saying, wow, now, first place, this is not the whole tribe of Dan. This was just two cities. They were kind of central cities in that part of the world at that time. But they weren't this wasn't the whole tribe of Dan. In fact, we'll soon find they managed to put an army together of 600 guys, which in that day was a drop in the bucket, But, so it was just these two towns. But they were tired of living in the mountains, and they said, we're going to go take, we want to go and take, anyway, our inheritance, what God has given us. So they decided to send these six spies out and to see what they were going to see. It kind of reminds you of the spies that Joshua or Moses sent across the Jordan River, remember? Only these spies, they came back with a good report, which we'll look at a little bit later. I don't know how you get, there wasn't anything bad about what they saw. It fit their nature fine. Anyway, we'll get there. So they took off. Now, where they went, where they were going, on your map again, is number 2 up here at the top. I'm sorry, was Dan at the top, up here where the Hittites. See the city of Dan up there, right on the border? Now that's about 4 miles from where we were at Caesarea Philippi. So that tells you how far up. I mean, we were right on the border with Lebanon. Remember, we were right there. I mean, you can see it. And over there was Syria. And so we were up in that little pocket. And Dan was about 4 miles from there. So northern territory of the land that God gave to Israel. And that's where they were heading. Now they took off from their towns down here, Zorah and Eshtaol, and they went up as far as the little neighborhood that Micah lived in. Now, after Micah got to where he was going, it wasn't really a town. It was a neighborhood. Okay, it was like if you were out in the middle of nowhere and you built a house in the middle of nowhere, and then your uncles and your nephews came, and they all kind of built houses, and you hired people, and they had little houses. I think probably the old lumber camps of the Northwest would be probably pretty close to that, you know, everybody came to work, and so they had their own little cabins or houses, and well, that was kind of like it was here. Now, this was forested land, by the way. Up in this part of Canaan, at that time anyway, was a lot of forests, and it was a very lush part of the country. And so they came to this little house or bunch of houses, and they decided to spend the night there. And I don't know how many days they'd been on the road. I just kind of did an estimate with a little, you know, it's about that much as 50 miles. So it was about 100 miles, roughly, maybe a little less, from where they started off to up here where Dan is. So whether they were 50 miles or 60 miles, I don't know, until they got to Micah's place. And so they decided, well, we'll spend the night at Micah's place. That doesn't necessarily mean in his house, but one of the surrounding houses. Somebody must have opened their doors and asked these men to spend the night, which was very common in those days again. And probably we have to use our imagination a little bit, but we know that Micah's priest, that Micah had built a chapel, and he had the ephod, and he had the images, and he had everything there. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that in the evening, this priest probably went into the chapel and prayed and held like a service, you know, how they, for their prayer services, where the rabbi or the priest would, they actually sing the scriptures and do those kinds of things. So it's probably not unreasonable to assume that these men were walking by and heard the voice of the priest as he was going about his ministering in this chapel. He might have even been preaching, who knows. But they heard his voice. Now it's interesting, and there's a lot of speculation, did they actually recognize his voice as somebody they knew, or did they recognize his voice as being from their territory because of the pronunciation and so forth of the words? It's not clear on that. However, we know that he was from down in that same area. He was from Bethlehem, and so that wasn't far from Zorah. Reasonable to assume he may have wandered through that part of the country before he met Micah, and they may have known him. At any rate, they recognized him. And so they probably went into the chapel, or they waited until he came out, and they started, what are you doing here? You know, we're 60 miles from home. What are you doing down up here? You know, come down there. What's going on? And so he relayed to them the story, how Micah had offered him this job and had these the graven image and the molten image and the other household gods, the teraphims, and he even had an ephod. You know, wow, he had everything he needed, and he was hired to be the priest. A hired priest, he was going about his priestly duties. Yeah. We look at that and we say, well, that's terrible. In fact, one of the commentaries, the guy is really hard on the people in this period of time. I mean, these are idolatrous, they're sinners, they're scum of the earth because they have these idols and they're doing all of these things. However, and I got to thinking about this today. Moses gave the temple setup, or the tabernacle, how the priests were all supposed to work and what they were supposed to do, and the giving of sacrifices. And you read that whole thing, and there's not a thing in there about individuals. How were individuals supposed to worship? Now they had to go to the ark, or go to the place to sacrifice once or twice a year. They were supposed to come at the Feast of Pentecost. They were supposed to come, for the Passover. But what about the other 300 days of the year? How were they supposed to worship God? How were they supposed to show anything to God or ask for anything from God if you're not where the ark was? all of a sudden, you know, you kind of get a different perspective. God never laid out for the individual how he was to stay in contact with God. He had to go to the priest and let the priest do the contacting for him. And so I think that kind of explains why God does not punish the people of this time for their images. Now, when he started punishing them for their images, it was when they had their temple and they had the whole system of worship was set up with synagogues and with priests in the different communities, and they were expected to go to the priests, you know, within their community. This is before all of that was set up. Mm-hmm. And so God, there's one scripture that says God winks, kind of winks at us sometimes. You know, he winks. In other words, he says, that's not right, but, you know, I understand. And we sometimes put God in the position of day and night. And we think everything is day and night. Everything's black and white. You're either here or you're there. But God has over and over again shown that that's not the case. There are those gray areas where God operates in gray areas sometimes. And I think this is one of those where it hasn't evolved into the complete structure of worship, and so he's kind of between the getting out of Egypt and the setting up the temple in Jerusalem. There is that in-between time. Yeah. And I think that's why the scripture keeps saying, in those days there was no king in Israel. It wasn't just the king, there was no priestly ordinances, there was no authority. And so they were kind of on their own. And here you have this man stuck up here in the middle of nowhere. And by the way, the ark was down here at Shiloh. Ark was at Shiloh. He's clear up here by Hazor, up in that area, Hazor. And was he expected to go that 50 miles every time he wanted to go talk to the priest? Get some direction, you see. All of a sudden we start to kind of see a little bit. Now, as far as the household gods were concerned, that was the prevalent idea in those days, that if you had your own god, okay, this was not considered a supreme deity type god. These were, they treated them like intermediaries. You could talk to your god, and this little god would talk to Jehovah. So he was acting as an intermediary. They were something they could look at, something they could talk to, with the idea that it was being conveyed to Jehovah himself. So it was not correct, but at the same time, you can understand, because that's what all the other people of the area were using, and that's what they were doing. And God himself didn't talk to individuals much. If he did, he came walking along as a theophany called the angel of the Lord. And then it was only in certain situations, such as Gideon. So I think we can begin to cut a little slack for this guy. You know, he was probably very devout. I mean, they spent a lot of money putting these things together and building his chapel and making sure he had a Levite that was his priest. He didn't just go out and pick up somebody. Now we're going to find that a few years after this, when Jeroboam came to power over the 10 tribes rather, he went and built his own temple. He built his own oxen and golden calves, and it says he didn't bother to worry about Levites. He just went and picked somebody to be a priest. And so that was a direct violation. But here it's kind of gray area, what God accepted and what God didn't accept. The one thing that interests me more than anything, I think, is that in order for these men to get where they were going, they had to go by Shiloh. Why didn't they stop at Shiloh and ask the priest at Shiloh if what they were doing was going to prosper? Kind of interesting. Is it they didn't trust the priest at Shiloh? Maybe they didn't think about it. You know, they got focused on going up there, and they never thought to stop at Shiloh and say, you know, priest, we need to know, is God going to prosper us on this trip? And it wasn't until they got up to Micah's priest that they asked. And people today, you know, they don't really want to ask God about what's going to happen or what they should or shouldn't do, or, you know, to direct them. They just kind of do it, you know. And they'll ask their financial advisors, and they'll ask others, but they never ask God what they should be doing. Talking to a young man who used to come to church here on the phone today, and he was telling me, yeah, you know, I haven't gone to church, quit going there, and he says, you know, I need to get back in church. And he's telling me all this, and I says, yeah, you know, if you haven't, he was telling me God hasn't led him anywhere else. He just hasn't felt led to go anyplace else. And I says, well, you know, if God hasn't led you anyplace else, it's a pretty good chance He wants you here. And if He wants you here and you're not here, then where's the problem? You need to spend some time and figure out what the problem is and fix the problem, because the problem isn't with God.
Yeah.
And that's what we get into. And I know I've talked to people before who leave churches, and I say, boy, I kind of miss going there. I really miss. Well, go back. You know, that's pretty simple. I mean, that's a really tough one, you know. Yeah, but you don't understand. Yeah, I understand. God wants you there. You're not there. Fix it. Whatever you have to do, fix it. If you're doing something wrong, quit doing what's wrong and go and get back where God wants you to be. And these guys, they were willing to talk to Micah's priest, but they didn't want to stop and inquire at Shiloh.
Yeah.
Now, notice also that after they talked to the priest, and they saw the ephod, and they saw the idols, and they saw all that this priest had, that Micah had given him, then they sought his counsel. It was like, oh, you got all of this stuff. Wow, he's paying you pretty good. You must be really a good priest. And so we'll ask your counsel. The guy at Shiloh, all he's got is a unum and a thum. Not very attractive. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Taking longer than I thought. All right, let's go to verse 6. And the priest said to them, go in peace. I got to go in peace. The presence of the Lord will be with you on your way. So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely, in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone. Then the spies came back to their brethren at Zorah and Eshtaol, and their brethren said to them, what is your report? So they said, arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess the land. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth. I have to emphasize the priest a little bit, because, you know, today, his answer is so right on the mark, right? I mean, it's just really definitive. What did they ask? You know, are we going to be prosperous? And what does he say? Go in peace. kind of like opening the morning paper and looking at your horoscope.
I don't do that.
You're going to have a peaceful day today, you know. Or open a Chinese cookie and read it. It's that same thing, you know. Notice there's nothing here. He says, the presence of the Lord be with you on your way.
Right.
Are you going to prosper? Oh, go in peace. The presence of the Lord will go with you. Does it say the presence of the Lord is going to defeat the enemy for you? You see, when God speaks, when God gives an answer, when God lets you know, He is definitive. He's never wishy-washy about whether you should go and do something, even if to you it appears to be wrong. Next week, we're going to look at some situations where they prayed to God, and God said, you go do it, and they went and did it and got defeated. Twice. See, God has His own reasons for doing things, and we don't always understand that. But He will not say, you go and I will be with you. I'll walk right beside you. No. Even to us today, now we like to think about God walking beside us, you know, there's that poem, you know, with the footprints in the sand, you know, we get all of those. And those are all good. They're all good, inspirational. But God doesn't usually walk beside us. He either goes in front of us or He goes behind us. He's usually there to give us the victory, or He's there to pull us out of trouble. He doesn't usually walk beside us.
That's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah.
I just thought of that. I hope you
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Could have write that down to my bank.
He wants to be our friend, you know, and all of that. But really, when it comes down to it, He is very definitive about what He says. If you ask God for something, God will give you a definitive answer. Good old Gideon. You know, God said, go. And he said, okay, I want to go, but I want to make sure that I'm hearing from you. So he put a fleece out there, right?
Yeah.
Now, the fleece wasn't a little bit damp in the morning, and the floor wet or dry. It wasn't a little damp. It says it was soaked, and the floor was dry. So, okay, the other way around. Okay, the floor was soaking wet, and the fleece was bone dry. It wasn't a little damp. See, he gave a very definitive answer when Gideon asked. All right. Now, also, it doesn't say here that he ever went in and asked God about it. He's talking to them in conversation, and they say, well, what do you think? Are we going to be prosperous? He didn't say, wait a minute, let me go pray to ask God about it. Oh, God will be with you. Go, my son, God will be with you. All right, so the spies took off, went to the city of Laish. And that was, you know, I have 50 on here. It could be 30. Probably maybe the distance from here to Tukwila, maybe, I don't know, about 30, probably 30, 35 miles. I was just estimating off of a computer screen with a little ruler, so I, you know, I said, I don't know, who knows? You had to, how many hills you had to go over. But it was right up at the Hittite border, and they found a city that was not protected, and it was so far from the rest of their countrymen that the other countrymen could not assist them in an emergency. They were Sidonians, and if you'll notice on your map, right up on the seacoast is the town of Sidon. The people of Sidon were Sidonians. So you can see the distance from there to Dan, the city of Dan. They're going to rename Laish Dan, so that's where that's at.
Oh, okay.
So you can see how far that'd be. You know, if you're going to grab an army and go up there to help the people of Laish, it's going to take you a few days to get there. By then, there's not going to be any of them left. You know, so help was not there. But they found this beautiful place and they were peaceful farmers. This was more a commune than it was a town. Really. There was no magistrates, they didn't have any rulers, there was nobody giving orders, they didn't have a lot of rules. It was people living together peacefully, farming the land, and they may have even been communal in the fact that they put their stuff together. It doesn't tell us that. But from all other indications, this was like a commune, or perhaps a family situation where everybody moves in, you know. But even in a family situation, the elder of the family is in charge. We have family get-togethers, and sometimes there's 30, 40 people there, but they all understand who's in charge. I don't care whose house it's at, you know, they all behave themselves because they better, because I'll talk to them if they don't. I'm the old man, and so I may be old and crickety, but I can still get in their face if I need to. But in this situation, there wasn't even that. There was nobody that had any authority here. Very strange way of living. But they were successful. It says they were peaceful. They lived in a place that had everything you could possibly want. This was a very low, lush valley. You remember we went by the valley there when we came out of Caesarea Philippi, you know, where it used to be swamped, and they filled that, and all how arid that, I mean, how beautiful that was with crops and everything in it, you know, where the farmers were ducking as the guys were shooting from across, anyway, from the Golan Heights, you remember that, yeah, going on a bus, the eucalyptus trees. Anyway, you remember how lush and beautiful that was. Well, this was toward the seacoast, just a few miles. It wasn't in the swamp area, but it had that same properties to it. So they were able to grow all kinds of things. Also, the Sidonians were lumbermen, and the mountains around this region were full of timber. Because you remember it was Lebanon, which is the border with what is now the Hittites, then is now Lebanon, and that was rich with lumber. You remember that it was Lebanon that sent the trees of Lebanon to Saul to build the temple, and because it was such sought after wood. Well, that falls for us projected down into this area. So they not only had the valley, which was full of all kinds of great crops, but they also had the mountains with all of this wood that could be used for building and so on. So it was an ideal situation. It was also kind of self-protected. Out of the beaten track, middle of nowhere, who's going to bother you? In fact, these people were so confident that nobody was going to bother them, they didn't even bother to communicate with anybody. They didn't have any treaties or pacts with anybody. They just lived their life, left everybody alone, everybody left them alone. And it was one of those places where it's just wonderful to be there. Well, the 5 spies saw this. And they came back to their brother. And they said, man, let me tell you, you got to go. And what's funny here is when they came back to their men, they even chided the people because they weren't already moving. Look at what they said. Let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Would you do nothing? How come you're not moving? We just told you how good it is. Why aren't you running home to pack up? That's what they said. That's even the commentaries noted that they were so excited. What are you waiting for? I just get your stuff together. We're moving. You know, right now. Go. Don't wait. These guys were excited. Well, you know, they've been living in those hills, you know, like in Getty, back in there, in those old dried out hills. They've been living back in there all this time, and here they got this lush place just waiting for them. They can sweep in there and just take it away. And not only that, God has given it to us. Why shouldn't we go? It's ours. And in that, they were absolutely correct. You know, we look at that and we see how terrible that is, how, you know, that they would look at this such a peaceful people and want to annihilate them. But God He didn't say, go annihilate all of them that are terrible people. He didn't say, you go out there and just, you just sort out the ones that are bad, the Philistines, and you take care of those and kill them off, but you leave these others alone that are peaceful. He didn't say that. He said, you start at one end and the other, and you just wipe them all out. I want them all out of my land. And we look at that and we say, that's terrible, God. Why? His land, his place, his decision. What happened to the people when they died? I don't know. That's not my, I don't know. Did he have a special dispensation for these people that were quiet and good and peaceful? I don't know. That's the gray area that God has control over. All I know is he says you have to do this today. He gives us the rules today. But then there was no rules from God as to what individuals did anything. In fact, the Apostle Paul in Romans, he talks about the Gentiles during the time of the law. And you know what he says? He said they had a law unto themselves. In other words, they weren't under the law of the Hebrews. They were under a law unto themselves. And that law was based on how they responded to their conscience. We keep reading in here, that the children of Israel did every man as he wanted or decided to do. Well, that's what the Gentiles were doing. But that wasn't what the Israelites were supposed to be doing. See, the Gentiles could get away with that. And these people probably would rate quite well with God because they were peaceful people. They didn't bother anybody. But God said, I need you now, I need you gone. All right. And today, we question God. Why is it this person dies and this person lives? God, that's not fair. It seems like every time somebody dies, people say, but God, that's not fair. Are we all supposed to live forever? We all die sometime. Mm-hmm. And yet we oftentimes want to put our own worth on this life. And we can't do that. Because the only worth in this life, the only worth are the crowns and the jewels and the gold and the silver that we lay up in heaven by how we work for God. We're only here to be servants. We lose track of that. We think God put us here to be somebody. God never put us here to be anybody except a servant. Jesus himself did not come as anything other than a servant. He never once stood up and showed his authority. Well, I shouldn't say that. He cleansed the temple twice when he went through and drove them out. But that was the only time he showed authority. Think about it. He came, he lived as a servant. That's what we should be doing. Living as a servant. And anything we get on the side, that's good. That's good. But we need to think and remember we're only servants here. All right. How I got on that, I don't know. So anyway, the people got together and they got ready to go. Let's go to starting with verse 11. And 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. Then they went up and encamped at Kirjath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they call that place Mahane Dan to this day, that is west of Kirjath Jearim. Anyway, as they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the country of Laish answered and said to their brethren, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, a carved image, and a molded image? Now therefore, consider what you should do. So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite man, to the house of Micah, and greeted him. The 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were with the children of Dan, stood at the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved images, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image. The priest stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. When these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image, the priest said to them, what are you doing? And they said to him, be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel? So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and took his place among the people. Okay, so let's get back down to Zorah. And what happened? Well, the spies came back and told them the good news, and so everybody packed up. It says there were 600 men, but these were the army. These were the army. And we're going to find out later, they brought their children, their wives, they brought all their household goods. They packed up and they were moving to Laish. And they didn't hesitate. They packed up and moved because God had given them their land. Us to do something. It may be a long time down the road before we get around to doing what God wants us to do. But when we finally come to that understanding where our problems lie, why are we in the hills of Judea? Why are we in this barren place? Why are we living in caves? Why are we in these cities that are fortified and we're in fear of our lives all the time? Why are we in this place? They finally understood it was because they didn't go take what God told them to take. That's their land, go get it. And when they finally came to that realization, and the spies said, hey, there's a town up there we can take. We only have 600 armed soldiers. This is ideal. We can take this place. It's not going to be an effort. And it didn't take them any time at all. Put their stuff together and get on a march. And they headed north. Now again, they went right by Ramah, right by Shiloh, and never stopped until again, they still hadn't figured that one out. But they marched north, and they came again to where the 5 spies had come to Micah's little conclave there. And no doubt they, before we get there, I want to point this out. It says they went up and encamped in Jargath. In your map, Jargath is number 3. So you can see they didn't go very far. And they encamped there. Why is that an important place? Well, if you remember that the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines in 1 Samuel. And the Ark of the Covenant was with the Philistines, I think about 6 months if I remember correctly. And during that time, they had a plague come on all the rulers. The land got full of rats. It was eating all their crops, and they were in a pretty sorry condition. They had, all the rulers suddenly had these hemorrhoids, what came on them. And so they started asking the wise men how they can get rid of this. And they said, you take that ark and you put it on a cart and you just head it out that way. Get rid of that ark. That's your problem. They thought Israel would be weak without the ark. Understand that the strength was in the ark. They were in worse shape with the ark than they would have let Israel have the ark. And this ark, they tied up a couple of oxen, if you remember, and they went on their way, and where the oxen stopped, they took the ark off, put it on a stone, and the place where it stopped seems to be pretty close to where Manoah's altar was, where Gideon, you remember, went up and tore down his father's altar and all of that. There was a large flat stone, and they took the ark and placed it on it. You see, the scriptures tie together so beautifully. And they say this was probably the place, it looks like it, in the same area where Manoah had his altar. And they called for the priest, and the priest came over, and they took this ark and they put it in a house. It was at this place where they put that, where that happened, was in this area. And that's where they stopped for the night. Before all of this happened, here were the Danites going to take their own land back. And the first night they camped is where the Ark of the Covenant ended up, when it was delivered from the Philistines. It's the only place that's mentioned that they stopped until they got all the way up to Micah's house. Now, I know they had to stop more times than that.
Yeah.
You're not going to move that fast with children and all of your household goods and animals and all of that. All right, so they kept going, and they came to Micah's little conclave. And the 5 spies said to the leaders of the city there, they said, you know what, there's a Levite priest here, and he's got everything he needs to minister to God for us. Now again, keep in mind, they were going up into the very northern part of Israel. No communications with anybody close around them. They're going to be pretty much cut off up there. And how are they going to worship? How are they going to inquire anything of God? Now, no matter how misbegotten their ideas were, they had this this desire to ask God what they should do. And how could they do that? Well, here was the answer to their problems. We'll just take the ephod, the graven image, the molded image, and all of that, and we'll even take the priest while we're at it, and we'll offer him more money. So while the army stayed outside the gates, so evidently they probably like a gated community. I don't think this was a big walled city or anything, but they probably had gates, keep the animals out more than anything. And so they waited outside the gate, and they were talking to the priest, and because he probably knew them. I still think he probably knew them, a bunch of them. And they were just carrying on a conversation while the 5 spies went in and robbed the place. And when the priest understood what was going on, he said, "What are you guys doing? What are you doing?" And it's interesting, they tell him, "Shut up, put your hand over your mouth, quit talking. Just be quiet and come with us." Wouldn't it be better to be the priest over all of us, a tribe, and all of us? They weren't the whole tribe. It was only, maybe a couple of thousand people at most. That's not a whole tribe, but they make it sound like, But it was certainly more than over Micah and his household. And so they no doubt were willing to pay him more money. It's interesting today, we have preachers that are more interested in how much money they're going to make than where God wants them to be. There are people who, ministers, who will minister as long as they're in the limelight. As long as they can get the money, they'll pastor, or they'll minister, or whatever. As soon as those funds start to go down and they're not making the money anymore, they start looking around. Is there another mega church I can transfer to? You know, is there someplace else I can go where I can make more money? I get paid more. I'm appreciated more. That's one of the things you hear. You know, being around preachers all my life, you kind of learn a different language about things, you know. Yeah, I don't really feel like I'm appreciated. What that means is they're not paying him enough. That's the coded language. You're not paying him enough. You know. I'm not appreciated. God, you know, personally, I think preachers would do better if they weren't paid. A lot of them. If they just had to depend on God to provide things. You know, the old preachers, back in the day, you know, you had the circuit rider preachers, and you had like Wigglesworth and Spurgeon. You know, Spurgeon had a big church, but before he had that big church, and there were so many of them, they didn't get paid anything. It was just whatever offerings they were able to get. Mm-hmm. And we have men that way today. They're call them evangelists. They go from church to church, and they get paid what somebody decides to pay them. And if you're not a good evangelist, you're not going to get paid very much. You know, that's. But I think sometimes that's better than drawing salaries, because if your livelihood depends on your ministry, the ministry then takes precedence. And it ceases to be something that comes from your head. It has to come from your heart. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, you know, when you're getting paid, you feel like, and there's no reflections here in this church. I know Rick's not that way. But I have been in churches where pastors, you know, I have to be careful what I preach. I don't want to offend. Because if I offend that person, he'll leave. He's a big tithe payer. We can't afford that. I understand you have to be careful. Understand, you know, that you need money. I understand it. But you cannot allow the gospel to be tempered by how much you're going to make. And it's that way in anything that we do for God. We cannot allow either money or prestige to direct us in what we do. I'm in a very enviable position here because I don't make anything, nobody pays me anything. I'm just here, you know, and I can say what I want. Like I said a couple Sundays ago, I'm not the pastor, I can say it, you know, you guys aren't paying me anything here. And so I'm in a pretty good position. But, you know, I understand the pressure that pastors are under to produce and to say things that will inspire, but you can't let that be your direction. The direction has to be, what does God want me to do? What does God want me to say? How does God want me to lead? And if we don't follow that, then we can get ourselves in trouble. And this particular young man, I think next week, even though it doesn't name him, I think we may be looking at the same individual, but we'll see next week, perhaps. Okay, so they took everything, and they took off, and notice verse 20. So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved images, and took his place among the people. So his heart was glad. He took all the stuff he needed for ministering, and he took his place among the people. Now, the English here just says he took his place among the people. It doesn't really say anything. But the Hebrew actually indicates that he took his place in the middle of the people. Now, why is that important? Well, when God commanded the order of movement, so when the cloud moved by day or the fire by night, the priests were to be in the middle of the tribes. Oh. So in this moving, he took his place as the priest. We're going to hire you to be the priest. I'm in the middle of the tribe. I'm in my place of authority. Okay? Now we can look at that both ways. I'm probably a little hard on this young man, because again, there was no, no rules in those days much about what the priest could or couldn't do. But at the same time, I think he probably understood his position he was being offered as that of the, not the high priest certainly, but a senior priest in this group of people. And they did show him the reverence that they should have. So they were following the rules of Moses in terms of the actual movement, and they had everything they needed for worship, and so they were following the law to some degree. So we have to give them credit, I think, for that. All right. One thing to remember, that hirelings always go where the grass is greener. If you hire a hireling to be your pastor, you can understand that at some point he's going to find some place that's greener. Some place that's more appealing. All right. So, now what happened to poor Micah? He's probably out in the field working, or he's met these men, and maybe he's gone back out in the field, or he's in his house, and suddenly somebody comes in and says, "Micah, your chapel has been raided and they've stolen everything, even your priest." Now, I mean, you can see poor Micah. I mean, hey, wait a minute. What is this? I befriended these guys, and look what they did to me.
Where you at?
Yeah.
21.
We're going to look at verse 21.
Okay.
Then they turned and departed and put the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them. When they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they called out to the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, "What ails you, that you have gathered such a company?" So he said, "You have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and you have gone away. Now what more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails you?" He was a little hot. And the children of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. So Micah, he got excited. Now the men around there, they probably all worshipped in this chapel. So the priest was probably a priest to this enclave. How many were there? I don't know. Maybe 100 men. Who knows? Who knows? But he decided he was going to go after Dan. So he took off after Dan. Now we know that Dan, these Danites, knew or suspected what Micah was going to do. So what did they do? They took their children and all of their animals and all of their goods, household goods or whatever, and they put them in front. Normally they wouldn't be in front. You'd have your animals in the back. I mean, you're walking along with 20 donkeys or whatever, and you'd be stepping around things the whole way. You think about animals. But they put them in front, and they put their children in front, so that before anybody from Micah's group could get to their families, they had to go through the armed men first. So they put everybody in front. That's how we know they had children and women and everybody with them. They were moving. So when Micah caught up to him, he hollered at him, or somebody did, probably Micah. And he was not happy. He said, "You've taken everything that is of value to me, and you have left me nothing." Now when we think about this, it's easy to suppose that Micah was really upset about all the money he had put into these idols. I mean, they put a lot of money into this, get it all done. But really, when you look at Micah, he wasn't upset about the value of what was taken. Otherwise, he would have said, well, then pay me something. You know, if you want them, okay, but pay me something. No. He said, you've taken everything that is of value to me. What Micah was saying is, you have taken my line of communication to Jehovah. I have nothing without him. Think about it, if suddenly they came in and said, you can't pray anymore. We're going to shut you off from prayer. We're going to stand here with a big old knife, and you even begin to pray, we're going to cut your throat. Would we take that over if they came in and said, we're taking all your life savings? Which one would we prefer? You see, with Micah, it wasn't the wealth. He still had all of his workers. He still had his fields. He still had his crops. He still had everything. The only thing he didn't have was a high priest, some images, and an ephod. He even still had an altar. So his concern was that he could no longer contact God. He could no longer hear from God. He could no longer ask God for direction. And in that, Micah was far better than many of us today. We don't hear from God, we don't ask God, and we don't know where we're going, and we don't even care. I'm not talking about us here, you know, I'm talking about Christians. They're more concerned about how much money they have, how much prestige they have, what kind of car they drive, what kind of a house they live in. That's the concern of their lives, and they never stop to say, where is my communication with God? Do I have that communication with God? Is he really real to me? Is he stirring me up? Is he working on me? Is he directing me where I'm supposed to go? Or am I just out there going where I want to go? Yeah, pretty heady stuff. Now, this poor Micah, I don't know if it may not have caught you when you read through that. But he put all of his value on his ability to communicate with God. Right or wrong, by the law or not, it was his desire to communicate with Jehovah. He was willing to take his 100 men, and maybe they had plowshares and clubs, I don't know what they had for weapons, but take his little group and go after 600 armed men. Of course, after he got there, changed his mind. So he asked him, called out to Dan, and of course, I think here the Danites were being very smuggy, you know. Well, what's the matter with you? What's your problem? What do you mean, Whisper? You took everything I have, and then you have the audacity to ask me what's the matter with me. I'm mad. You want to know what it is? I'm upset. And the reply of these Danites is kind of interesting. They said, you know, we don't want to hear your voice again. In other words, don't say another word. You stop your complaining, because you're going to get some of these guys mad. And these big 600 soldiers, these big guys, if they get mad, they're going to wipe you and your household out. In other words, shut up and go home.
Yeah.
Now, whether they were right in what they did or not is immaterial. That's immaterial. We can't justify their stealing the prophet or the priest and justifying the stuff from Micah. However, at the same time, we have to remember that Micah was the one who put out the money so he could build his own images and his own religion over here. Whether he intended that as a conduit to Jehovah or not is immaterial. It was something that God did not ordain. He may have put up with it, but He did not ordain it. And you see, when we do that, when we build our own ideas of what religion is, when we put ourselves in this position of saying, this is what I need to do. Oh, the Bible, never mind the Word. We don't need that. We'll put that aside because that doesn't fit what's happening today. This is what we need to do today. And when we allow ourselves to build our own religious ideas around that, and that's our way of worship. And I've heard some pretty crazy things people do in order to worship. You know, I mean, think about even the Philippines. They're very famous, you know, for flagellations. I don't know if they still do that much or not. They used to do it all the time. You know, flagellation. Well, who said that's doing anything? In Rome, they crawl up the steps of the basilica, I think it is. They put glass down and they, you know, and they do this at Lent. You know, part of. What's God never said do that. What are you doing that for? Well, this is our worship. No, it isn't. It's your stupidity. God never said do that. God said He never said He'd honor that. And all of these things always bring some kind of an not so good end, I'll put it that way. And we see here where everything that Micah put into his own little religion, he lost. He lost. I was talking to a young man that came with Caitlin Sunday morning. He's a basketball player. He's a senior going to school. And I was talking to him a little bit. And I warned him. I said, now, you know, I know you're a good basketball player and you're going to go on a scholarship to the university down there and you're going to play and all of that. But I said, keep one thing in mind. Keep God first. Keep your studies first. And as long as you can play basketball, great, you know, but don't let it take over. Because all it takes is one quick turn where you blow your knee out and your basketball career ends.
Yeah.
That quick.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if you allow those things to take the place of God in your life, He'll see that you make the quick turn and you blow your knee or whatever out and you're done.
Yeah.
You know, remember years ago, we had a family here and they had a young man about what, 8 or 9 or something. He was a hockey player. Remember them? And so they had him in junior hockey and he was really, really good. And we worked with him, knew him well. We rode motorcycles with him. But they were coming to church here. But they decided that they needed to give their son every opportunity to be an NHL hockey superstar. So they packed up everything and moved to Minnesota because they had hockey in high school in Minnesota. The last I heard, he was playing high school hockey when he got hurt and couldn't play anymore. Now, you know, they were active in the church here. They were, you know, a couple that you would love to have, you know, gung-ho. Off they went, and it's over. If we think that God has given us gifts and we can use those gifts some way, he would say, yeah, you know, he could be a, man, think what he could do for God if he was a hockey star with the NHL. Yeah. And some of the stars do things. Deion Sanders, probably one of the best cornerbacks that ever played football for the Dallas Cowboys. He got saved in T.D. Jakes' church. He used to open his garage every Saturday. And half of the football team, he has a big garage, he's very, you know. All the coaches and half the football team came to church on Saturday and T.D. Jakes would preach to them. Wow. People don't know about that. So the big stars on the Dallas Cowboys were saved in that garage. So it happens, sure. But it doesn't, that wasn't the aim of somebody wanting to be a football player, you know? It happens. And God has to direct those paths. God is the one who has to pull that stuff off. We shouldn't do that. Hurry, I'm going to be late. All right, so he took off after him. When he saw they were too strong for him, he showed some sense and went home. And that's the last we hear of Micah. All right. Verses 26 to 29. So they took the things, that's the Danites, so they took the things Micah had made, and the priest who had belonged to him, and went to Laish, to a people quiet and secure. And they struck them with the edge of the sword, and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer, because it was so far from Sidon, and they had no ties with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. So they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. So the 600 soldiers and all their families and the whole kit and caboodle from the two cities came to Laish in very quick battle. They overtook the city, killed all the people, burned the city down. Now, of course, the people had no help. They were too far from Sidon. They had no army. And this kind of fit the pattern of Dan, didn't it? They didn't want to go to battle in the first place to get their territory. You know, they just kind of were pacifists about the whole thing and allowed the Philistines to run them up into the hills without much of a battle. They got this city and it didn't take much of a battle. Now, whether they would have tried to take the city if it was well fortified, that's another issue. We don't know. While this seems to be a very revolting action on their part, remember they were fulfilling both the commission and the command of God. The fact that it had been given years before is immaterial. God gave the command and they were finally getting around to fulfilling that commission that had been given and the commands of God in taking that town. Now they burned the city. To me, this is the only mystery in this whole thing. Why in the world would they burn the city down when they turn around and rebuild it? Why? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. I can understand plundering the town. I can understand killing all the people. But you'd think they'd leave the town alone. I mean, we're going to have to rebuild all of this. Maybe they didn't like the architecture. I don't know. Whatever. They burned it down. They rebuilt the city, and they named it Dan after the father of their tribe, Dan, who was the son of Jacob. All right, finally, verses 30 to 31. And the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image. And Jonathan, the son of Gershon, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. All right, so I see some very interesting things in this last couple of verses. Notice number one, they rebuilt the city, moved in, got all settled, and they set up the image. The carved image. What happened to the molded image? And the household gods? Didn't they use those? They only set up the carved image. I don't know what the carved image was of. But they obviously, I think, and obviously this is my opinion, okay, is that they set up that image and used that priest for the express purpose of contacting God. They didn't need the molded image. That would have been probably a calf, because that's what they usually molded. If they had a molded image, it was a calf, it was metal. And God had already said get rid of that, you know, back when they came out of Egypt at Mount Sinai. And what happened to the household gods? Did they realize they didn't need the household gods? They just had the one image. So it's one of the mysteries. What did they do with the rest of it? Bury it? Burn it? I don't know. Well, maybe they lost it on the way. I don't know. But notice this. and Jonathan. Now we know the Levite's name.
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan. Why they didn't give the name earlier, I don't know. But his name was Jonathan. And he and his sons, he was the son of Gershom, and he was the son of Manasseh, so he was a Levite, and his mother was probably from Manasseh. And his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. I read there was quite a long discussion amongst scholars on what it was talking about, and they finally, I think the consensus is that these men, these priests, remained priests to this area until the Assyrians came in and completely wiped out all of Israel. We've studied about that. So that was a long time that these men were priests in the city of Dan. Now that tells me that they had, while it might have been somewhat perverted, it was at least acceptable to God what they were doing. They were probably offering sacrifices and using this image in the worship. What the image was of, I don't know. There's some speculation it might have been a seraphim, similar to what was on the altar in the Holy of Holies, which would make really good sense if you were thinking in terms of the sacrifice and the sprinkling of blood on that sacrifice that happened every year. Maybe they were thinking that by having the seraphim image there, that was acceptable in showing the mercy of God as they offered their sacrifices. I don't know. It's all conjecture. We don't have a picture of the image. Somebody didn't have their cell phone turned on. It was out of juice when they went to take the picture, and so we don't have it. All right. All right. Now that image, by the way, was probably destroyed sometime in the time of Saul or David. It's just a conjecture again on the parts of somebody. For one reason, because both of these men sent people throughout the land to get rid of all the images. So there's a very good possibility that image went away at that time, either under Saul or David. And that's it for tonight. Do you have any questions?
No.
All right, next week we're going to look at a Levite and his concubine, and it gets rather gruesome, so just warn you ahead of time.
A Levite? A
A
particular?
Levite, yeah, we don't know who it is. Could have been the same Levite, I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe not.